In this video, we shall discuss in detail about the different types of a system bus in a computer system. So, what is a system bus? In a computer system, a bus is a communication pathway that connects the different components of the computer system, like the CPU, memory unit, the I/O devices. So it is a communication pathway that connects the different components of the computer system so that we can transfer data, signals, control signals, or the address between the components of the system. So a bus is used for the communication between the different components of the computer system. There are three types of system bus: the address bus, data bus, and the control bus. We shall see in detail about each bus. First one is the address bus. So from the name itself we can understand its function. The address bus, it carries the address. The address can be either the memory address or the address of the I/O devices. So the address bus will carry the address of the memory location or the I/O devices from where the CPU wants to access the data. So it is unidirectional. Unidirectional means the address bus will carry the address from the CPU to the memory unit or the I/O devices. So that is, it is unidirectional. So the main function of the address bus is to carry the address. That address could be either the memory address or the address of the I/O devices from where the CPU wants to access the data. The CPU can either read a data from the memory unit or the I/O device, or the CPU, if it wants to write or store the data into the memory unit or send to the output unit or the user, then it sends the address of the particular memory location or the I/O device on the address bus. So the main function of the address bus is to carry the address of the memory unit or the I/O devices, and it is unidirectional. And the next bus is the data bus. From the name we can understand that the main function of the data bus is to carry the data between the processor, memory unit, and the I/O devices. So the data bus is used to transfer the data between the different components of the computer system. It is bidirectional. Address bus, it carries the address. Data bus carries the data between the components of the computer system, and it is bidirectional. And the last one is the control bus. The main function of the control bus is to carry the control signals. The control signals are responsible for coordinating the communication between the different components of the computer system. So the control bus carries the control signals, and the control signals are responsible for coordinating the communication between the different components of the computer system. So the different control signals are the read signal, write signal, the interrupt signal, the clock signal. So these are some of the control signals which will be used for coordinating the communication between the different components, and it is also bidirectional. So in this diagram we shall see how the CPU and the other components communicate with each other. Okay, so this diagram explains about the communication between the different components of the computer system using the system bus. So here we see three units: the CPU unit, the memory unit, and the input and output unit. And if you see three different types of system bus: the address bus, data bus, and the control bus. Together we call it as the system bus. So three buses are there, and together we call it as the system bus. So if, for instance, if the CPU wants to read a data from the memory unit, so how it will communicate with the memory unit? First, the CPU will send the address of the memory location on the address bus from where it wants to fetch the data from the memory location. So the CPU will place the address of the memory location from where it wants to access the data on the address bus, and along with the address it will also send a control signal on the control bus. If it wants to access the memory location, it will send a memory read control signal. If it wants to read a data from the memory unit, it will send a memory read control signal on the control bus. So now the control bus will send the control signal memory read to the memory unit, and the address bus, it will send the address to the memory location. So once the memory unit receives the address, it will identify the exact memory location from where the data is to be read or fetched. Okay, so that data will be read from the particular memory location and it will be placed on the data bus. From the data bus, it will be transferred to the CPU. Once the CPU receives the required data, it will deactivate the control bus or the control signals, so that the other control bus, address bus and the data bus will be now free for the next communication. So this is how the communication takes place between the CPU and the memory unit. Similarly, if it wants to write or store any data in the memory unit, it will send a control signal called as the memory write on the control bus, and it will place the address of the memory location where it wants to write or store the data in the memory unit on the address bus. So the address bus will carry the address of the memory location where the data is to be stored, and when the memory unit identifies the address, it will take the data from the data bus and it will store it in the particular memory location. So this is how the CPU communicates with the memory unit. Similarly, if the CPU wants to communicate with the input and output unit, it will again the same process. It will send the control signal. In this case, it will send an IO read or an IO write control signal on the control bus. If it wants to read a data from the input device, it will send an IO read signal, and if it wants to send an output result to the user, then it will send an IO write address or control signal on the control bus. Okay, so IO read and IO write are the control signals used to communicate with the input and output unit. And similarly, the address of the IO device will be placed on the address bus. So the address from where the IO unit, which IO unit it wants to access, so that address will be placed on the address bus. So when the particular input unit or the output device is identified, then that unit will place the data on the data bus. From the data bus, the CPU will receive the data. After the CPU receives the required data, it will deactivate the control signal IO read or the IO write, so that now the system bus will be free for the next communication among the components. So this is how the data or the address is transferred between the different components of the computer system. Thank you for watching.